Hello, welcome to the Lightning Talk today on how your youth philanthropy program experience can help make you a top candidate. For everyone watching, my name is Remy and and I am the Chief Program Officer here at the Three Pillars Initiative. TPI is a national nonprofit whose mission is to work with communities to develop and launch programs that teach the art, science, and business of philanthropy to the next generation. We launched our Lightning Talk series this year to bring kind of short and pithy discussions where we just dive right into the heart of the discussion, and people can kind of be in and out in 15 minutes. You can see any other recordings that you'd like to on our website at threepillarsinitiative.org. Now, today, I'm thrilled to be welcomed by, or I'm actually thrilled to welcome Megan Lewis. Megan is a senior principal at Kittleman and Associates, a nonprofit executive search firm working to bring new executive leadership to nonprofits across the country. Welcome, Megan.
So glad to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So the first thing I just wanted to have is just to have you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. I grew up in Oak Park, Illinois, which is sort of the home of TPI and Future Philanthropist Program. As you mentioned, I do professionally work for Kittleman, which I'll touch on here in just a moment. But because of the relationship between Kittleman and TPI and Future Philanthropist Program or FPP, Rick King, who was the generator of all of this great programming, was also the president and CEO of Kittleman at the time when he created this. I was sort of by default one of the early admin people for FPP, and even wore hats like running around and taking pictures at events and what have you. So it's kind of funny, but how it's all evolved. And obviously, the program has professionalized immensely beyond my contributions early on. But my husband also has been a mentor for about 15 years. Actually, we've lost track of how many years it actually has been, but somewhere in the ballpark of 15.
Yeah.
And he also is now a board member for TPI. So it is this program in one form or another has been very much a part of our lives for many years. And actually, now that we have two adult-ish children, 123 and 120, both went through the program here in Oak Park, and so I can speak to it from a parental perspective as well. So glad to be
Yeah.
here.
I guess we can kind of start there. You mentioned that both your kids went through that program in Oak Park.
Yeah.
After having seen them go through the program, what would you see, or would you say, I guess, people should make sure to highlight on the resume after having gone through that process?
Yeah, I think, boy, there's so much that is unique and different about this program. I remember when our kids were doing their applications for college and talking with their counselors, at the high school, who obviously knew that they were in the program. But it was just such a differentiator and so unique by compared to, kind of the average student council or, leadership on a sports team. And all of that's important. Please don't, I'm not discrediting that at all. But this is so different. And there are only a handful of, organizations across the country at this point. It will continue to grow, but that engage in this and offer this opportunity for these kiddos to understand what as you said, the art and science of philanthropy. And, it is something that, uh, you know, it, it is a unique and competitive program. Admissions officers at universities eat this up. They think it's so fascinating. It also is on a resume, something that helps to present you as a whole person, as
Mhm.
opposed to just, well, I worked part-time at Starbucks in high school, and I was captain of the volleyball team, or whatever. All important things, but this really gives a roundness to who you are as an individual and the exposure that you've had to philanthropy, to other transferable skill sets that other your peers might not have opportunity to be exposed
Yeah.
to. So there's more to dig into there, but I'll let you do that as opposed
Yeah.
to rambling.
No, that works well, I think, because what we're seeing, I think a lot of young people across the country, especially in high school, everyone is doing more and more. Almost every young person that we talk to has experience in some sort of civic work and some sort of like volunteering work and like everyone has so much stuff that they're doing all the time that they're trying to put on their resumes. From the perspective like an outside person looking at this on a resume, how should someone differentiate that? Like you're mentioning that there's a difference between this program and these other leadership or volunteerism opportunities.
Mhm.
What sets those apart if you're reading it just as a description or something on a page?
Yeah, um, again, I'm going to go back to the transferable skill sets. I think, you know, as part of, and again, I can only speak to the FPP program that's
Yeah.
here in Oak Park, and River Forest as opposed to other programs around the country. But, you are getting exposure to understanding how investments work, how endowments, are managed. Experience with funding decisions. So whether that, who's going to get a grant, so reviewing those grants, making those site visits or doing those site visits and making those critical decisions around, how much are we going to fund this program versus this one? And, I mean, that's challenging, but also gives you the opportunity to learn how to function in a team environment. Not only just in your larger cohort, but within your, smaller group of 5 to 6 people with your mentor. This is something that in college you have to do a lot of, group projects, and in real life you have to be able to work collaboratively and effectively with other people on your teams. So that's great work experience as well. And then of course the sales solicitation or fundraising, being able to sit down with prospective donors and tell the story and the why, understanding why what a donor's priorities are individually, and figuring out how to match that with what FPP offers. I mean, these are all amazing skill sets that feed into sales, event planning, fundraising, depending on what avenue you want to take down the road as a professional. And then also just an understanding of the nonprofit sector. There are so many people. I mean, as you noted at the top of the conversation, I work for a firm that is dedicated to executive search for the nonprofit sector. We have a lot of people who want to transition out of the corporate world into nonprofit sector to be with a mission-driven organization. But there's so much that they don't understand about what that
Yeah.
is. And kids that have gone through the program have a better understanding of that than most adults out there.
Hmm.
So, I think those are
Yeah.
things that I definitely highlight.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think that's interesting that you mentioned that because I think there's the aspect that, you can be in high school and having this on your resume for your college, and you can also kind of talk about it after college. And I think the transferable skills that you're mentioning, I think is something that everyone can highlight in the program, but it's also interesting to be able to highlight that thereafter in terms of just how this leads you down different paths, no matter what path you take down. So it's interesting that you're mentioning that. So from the perspective, I guess, a little bit broader, why do you see there just to be a benefit in general to have this type of a thing like volunteerism, civic engagement on a person's resume?
Yeah, I think it's a competitive advantage. I mean, it really helps to highlight you as a full person. I mean, yes, we all have our career paths and we have, what we have built as a resume, and that's all great and good. However, I think being able to present yourself in a way that highlights again, and not to keep using the word differentiator, but I really think that this
Yeah,
is such an applicable term in this scenario, because there just aren't that many people that have this experience.
yeah,
And it is just, again, the transferable aspects of it are so important. Obviously, you need to be able to align that to what it is that you are applying for. But as I just highlighted in my last response, I think there's a lot of similarities, and those same muscles get flexed, whether it's fundraising or sales. It's the same way you got to meet your prospect where they are
yeah.
and determine what's in it for them, and all of
Yeah.
that. So I think that's really important. One of the questions that we had kind of talked about earlier was, making sure that that's highlighted in a cover letter. Avoid utilizing AI and really speak from your heart in your cover letter. Talk about the why, why is this important to you? Why is this resonate with you? When I talk with candidates every day, my first question to them is, what are your push and pull factors? What is pushing you out of your current position if you were if an
Okay.
applicable situation? And what is pulling you towards this opportunity? And I think that's the part that's applicable
Mm,
for whether it's a college application or a first position or whatever, or down the road.
yeah.
What is that pull? Why this? Why now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of framing that because I think, like I mentioned earlier, I've seen a lot of people that just kind of accumulate things on their resume. Just, I've done now 50 different volunteering opportunities or I have 125 hours of whatever. But I think there's something to be said about that, kind of like the through line of what is the meaning behind it. And I think if you're able to do that in a cover letter, I think that sounds perfect. And I think in the same way that a resume, to me at least, it's kind of telling a story about a person more than just here's what I've done literally in my jobs. But if someone's hiring you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is that kind of what you're looking at as a recruiter of like, would this be a good fit as a person in this location versus just as a person doing a job at a location?
Yeah, I'm always looking at the full picture. And I will tell you that if if, as you just described, if it's just a punch list of here's what I've done, and I'm tactically focused, that's one thing. And depending on the role, maybe that's important. But we all are humans. We have to be relatable. We have to work collaboratively. We have
Yeah,
to, be able to function in a group or team environment. And that's where fit, which is always a term I hate, but that really factors in.
yeah,
And I think the more you can, as an applicant, whether school, work, whatever, um, paint the picture of who you are as a full person and your understanding of the world, and the fact that these young people have the opportunity to go through this program, whatever iteration of it is that they're going through or around the country. um, this is forming who you are and how you view the world and understand how the world works around you,
yeah,
and impacts lives. And that is a world, understanding that not everyone in their early 20s or late teens has an understanding of.
yeah.
So, being able to articulate that, however it's applicable for each person or yourself or whatever, is really going to be imperative, and will set you apart from the masses. I do want to just note that, AI is such a factor these days
Hmm.
for especially entry level positions, and how, so many, um, large firms or companies are utilizing AI to scan resumes and cover
Yeah,
letters and all that. And, I mean, we went through this with our son a year ago, and, it's got to be a page long and whatever. And so I think sometimes these sort of nice to haves, or what are considered nice to haves to put on a resume, kind of fall off the bottom because there's
yeah.
just literally not enough space unless you're using 4-point font. And you know what? This is not something you want to let fall off. Make
Hmm.
sure that's on there. Let go of being the, the captain of the volleyball team.
Right.
Say you were on the volleyball team or what, but
Sure.
whatever. I mean, like, make sure it fits on there somehow.
Yeah, you want to highlight the big things that are worth highlighting like that. And I think kind of what you're talking about is a lot of the agency that young people in the programs wind up having, which also differentiates it from other
Yeah,
opportunities that if I'm just going to a soup kitchen and I'm just being told do this thing in this way, it's great
right.
that you're giving your time, but I think there's a difference to be had with, you are given an opportunity to advocate yourself or advocate for things or do, like you're mentioning with the endowment management and looking at how taking more of an active role in a lot of that stuff. And so
Yeah.
I think the other thing I wanted to ask is from the perspective of a lot of the students that go through these programs, and also as a former graduate of the program myself, in high school, I think it's really hard for a lot of the people to understand themselves why it's a big deal and why it's different. I
Mm.
think I see a lot of parents that immediately they see this program, they read it, and they say, "This is fantastic. I've never seen anything like it. I would love to have been part of this." And you
Mhm.
talk to a high schooler, and it's like, "Yeah, as I do this thing on Wednesdays, and I go to this meeting for a couple hours, and everything just kind of gets muddled together with tests, with how much work they're doing, with all these extracurriculars and stuff." What would you say to young people that are kind of going through this process as to why this is so notable? Why is it that all these adults have this reaction when they're seeing this from an outside perspective versus someone going through it and just thinking of it as I'm just doing things the best that I can?
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, it goes back to the uniqueness of the opportunity.
Yeah.
You said it. These parents, myself included, didn't have this kind of an opportunity. The closest thing I had was an investments class in high school, which I learned about investing, but I
Yeah.
didn't learn anything about nonprofit, endowments or how that investing, class or those skill sets that and understanding of, the stock market and everything else, how that directly affects an endowment management. I mean, and honestly, like my next door neighbor, their daughter is in the program right now, and she just shared like last week that her experience in FPP has helped her to determine what her next path is going to be in
Yeah.
college. And that is going to be she wants to manage an endowment for an organization. Or like
Yeah.
be she wants to go into finance, but do endowment management and work with these nonprofit organizations to make sure that their funds are growing and continue to support the mission of what they're doing. So it that's just
Yeah.
one
No,
example,
that's
but
incredible.
and she's 18. She hasn't even graduated from high school yet, and
Right.
she's already, this has already changed the trajectory of her life. I
Yeah, and
mean,
it's such a
it's
specific
incredibly
path.
powerful.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of people that I've talked to that are in the nonprofit sector at least didn't intend to be in the nonprofit sector going into it. It's just like, oh, I was given an opportunity, I kind of fell into this at some point. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot more of recently is young people being like, oh, actually, this is perfect. This is what I wanted to do. I've always wanted to help people, and I didn't know what that meant until I realized that there's just a whole sector of jobs that's the meaning behind the job is to just help other people rather than being motivated by other things. So, and that's
Yeah.
really interesting. That's an amazing story that you have for that.
Yeah, well, we're called the third sector, but it's the opportunities are there, and the nonprofit sector is changed a lot in the last 15 to 20 years.
Yeah,
Lots more embrace of best practice from the business and corporate space. It is much more competitive. The salaries, I mean, at entry level, still not great, but
yeah,
when you get up into the executive levels, much more competitive and comparable to the, for-profit
yeah.
world. So, I mean, there's amazing opportunity. And so again, going back to your question, I'm sorry, I kind of went
No,
all
yeah,
over. But I think exposing kids to these opportunities in mission-driven organizations, and especially the Gen Z generation is, as you just noted, wants to do good, wants to better the world. And not that any other generation didn't have that, but I mean
yeah.
it is more of a core value for
Hmm.
Gen Z than it is for anyone else, I would say. And I think that's just really cool opportunity for these folks to be exposed
Yeah.
to what that means. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I guess one thing that I'd have about that process and the application process and going to, as someone that reviews a lot of resumes, I think there's a lot of people that I talk to that feel like it's really difficult to get jobs or it's difficult to know, what is, like you mentioned, there's AI that's reading my cover letter, my resume, or whatever's happening for that process and not really having a full understanding of the process. Where some people think it's, I have to have just the right words in the right order on my resume. And some people think that's not it at all. And it's more about, what is the story that you're telling about it? And it's more of like a holistic approach to it. Is there is there any right answer to any of that? Is there any information on like what people should or should not be doing, or is it just, this is it just kind of differs for everyone? Because I think there's also a lot of people that wind up selling ideas to, this is the right answer. This is the only way you have to do your resume. Or some people say never do a cover letter again in your life, and other people say that's the only thing you should be focusing on. So, do you have any insight on that from someone that kind of works in that world?
Oh my God, there's so much noise,
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
all of this. I mean, and everybody's looking to capitalize
Right.
on people's, insecurities or, misinformation or, just their need for good guidance on this. And I think, um, again, in my world, it's more focused on CEO,
Yeah.
because that's what I do. But so, entry level, earlier career
Right.
situation is a little different. And I think you have to be committed to doing your research. If you're applying in the nonprofit space for different positions, that's an easier environment in which to have direct conversation with a hiring manager, because oftentimes their information is listed on a website, and you can get in touch with them. It's a little, easier to find somebody in a 20-person organization versus a 20,000 person
Right.
organization, right? I think in the sort of corporate application space, you have to play the game a little bit more just because they are likely to be utilizing AI, as we've discussed, to scan these letters and applications and resumes. And yes, you probably do have to fit it into one page and, whatever. But I will tell you that still, I will always tell you, writing a good cover letter that is authentic, that is representative of who you are. Sure, sprinkle in all the key, buzzword crap that
Sure.
they are going to be looking for. Fine, put that in there, but speak from the heart and make it unique and talk. I mean, and even write a different one for every application. Don't just recycle it, because you know
Right.
what? The person who's reading it can totally tell.
Yeah.
Like you've just plugged this word in and whatever. Like,
Right.
don't
It's
do
not
that.
specific to us.
Right. And that to me says I'm not really interested. I'm throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. So if, again, be authentic, be true to who you are, and honest about what your why is, or your pull factor, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think that's something that a lot of people don't even realize they have that why. They expect that it's some other thing that they're missing, and they fill out some forms and are like, must be what I should be doing. And if you just stop them and ask them like, no, but why do you want this? I think it's the same thing with the youth philanthropy programs is why are you here? Like you joined the
Right.
program because you wanted to be here. And as soon as a young person stops and thinks about it for a second, it's like, oh yeah, well, I joined this because this is my mission. I wanted to help people. I wanted to do good. I wanted to give back. I wanted to make a change in my community in the way that I haven't seen it. Like there's most people I feel like do have that answer. And I think simplifying exactly just how you said it of just state your why. And I think that's awesome. And it's
Well,
perfect advice.
and even talk about the journey, because
Yeah.
your why might have been at the beginning of your junior year, could be very different at the end of your senior year,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
how did you get along on that? How did that grow? How did you change as a person? How did that influence your life? Um,
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
that's
that's powerful.
It is. That's really powerful. That's some of the best stories I've heard have been from students that have gone through the program at the beginning saying, I was a completely different person. And seeing the community, seeing the work that people are doing has just changed who I am, what I want to do, and exactly like you're saying, like my why. So I think the last thing I would say, or last question I'd have, and I know that we've kind of gone a little bit long with some of that, is just, is there anything else you would want to say to people that are in the programs, people that are graduating the programs, people that have been out of the program for a few years? As to how that continues to relate to them and or their prospecting process in the world.
Oh, golly. I don't know that I have any greater insight, necessarily beyond what we've already discussed, but I think, and again, this is coming from my perspective as a parent of young adults. I just think, that, you know, talking about how these experiences mold you as a person, just sort of a continuation of what we were just saying,
Yeah.
be able to articulate that, talk about that. Um, how is that influencing your own philanthropy, your own giving of your time, treasure, and talent
Yep.
in your life? And that could be applicable even, for kids who are going into college. If you are, joining a Greek organization or whatever, those are nonprofits and they
Absolutely.
are doing, lots of service work.
Hmm.
Are you doing it because your parents told you that you needed to do it?
Right.
Or are you doing it because this is something that feeds you as a person and,
Yep.
giving back? And I just encourage everybody obviously to do that, but in your own way,
Yep.
however that is. But yeah,
And that's perfect.
yeah,
That's a perfect summarization of all that we just talked about. And I know there's a lot of other questions that we could ask, and maybe we'll have to have another time that we ask you more specific questions about that in more details. But I really appreciate all the time that we've had today, and thank you so much. I appreciate it.
absolutely, absolutely my pleasure. And it is my honor to be able to talk about this amazing program. And so thank you for the invitation.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right. Bye.